Boa noite a todos. Eu sou a Diana Souza. Sejam bem-vindos ao segundo evento da Road to EuroSteamCon Portugal.
Good evening, I'm Claudia Silva and welcome to the second event of Road to SteamCon Portugal.
Para aqueles que não sabem, ou é a primeira vez que estão connosco, o EuroSteamCon Portugal está inserido no EuroSteamCon, um evento europeu para celebrar a cultura steampunk. Este ano irá regressar a Portugal nos dias 3 e 4 de outubro, no norte do país. Se quiserem mais informação, podem consultar o link por baixo dos nossos nomes.
And for those of you not in the know or watching us for the first time, EuroSteamCon Portugal is part of the EuroSteamCon, an European event celebrating steampunk culture. This year, it's going to return to Portugal during the 3rd and 4th of October in Porto. If you want more information, please check the lovely links under our names.
Como no evento anterior, com o escritor Jim Butcher, este hangout irá estar disponível de imediato na nossa página do YouTube para aqueles que não puderem assistir ou tenham de sair mais cedo, portanto não se preocupem. Assim que possível, vamos disponibilizar uma versão legendada em português. A do primeiro evento está prestes a sair, portanto fiquem atentos. Após a apresentação da autora, vamos passar a falar exclusivamente em inglês, por motivos óbvios.
As with the previous event with the author Jim Butcher, this hangout will be immediately available afterwards in our YouTube page for all of you who couldn't be here or had to leave early, and it will be in English. As soon as possible, we will also be posting a version with Portuguese subtitles. The subtitled version of the first event will be coming out soon, so please stay tuned. And if you're wondering about the two-language thing, we'll be reverting to full English in a moment for the comfort and peace of mind of our esteemed guest.
Após a nossa entrevista, queremos ouvir as vossas perguntas. Tal como anteriormente, primeiro vamos ter perguntas mais focadas em steampunk e na série da Clockwork Century. A Cherie amavelmente acedeu a dar-nos algum tempo para perguntas abertas para o final do hangout, por isso deixem as vossas perguntas em português ou em inglês na página do evento, do lado, em comentários no Facebook ou no link do YouTube em que podem estar a assistir isto.
And after the interview, we'll open the floor to your questions, queries and conundrums. As previously, we'll first focus on steampunk questions and Clockwork Century, the steampunk series that Cherie wrote, but she kindly agrees on letting us set some time aside for an open Q&A. So please leave your questions as comments on the Facebook announcement or the YouTube link where you should be watching the interview right now.
Portanto, hoje temos connosco a escritora norte-americana Cherie Priest, conhecida pela sua série de steampunk The Clockwork Century, além de outros livros como Maplecroft e I Am Princess X, que vai ser publicado já esta semana. Cherie Priest foi nomeada para o Nebula e o Hugo Awards e em 2010 recebeu o Locus Award pelo Bone Shaker, o primeiro livro da série The Clockwork Century.
And here with us today is the prize-winning American author Cherie Priest, known for her steampunk series The Clockwork Century, as well as other books such as Maplecroft and I Am Princess X, which is going to be released later this week. Cherie Priest was nominated for both the Nebula and the Hugo Awards, and in 2010 she won the Locus Award with Bone Shaker, the first book in the Clockwork Century set series.
So, well, Cherie, welcome to the Road to EuroSteamCon Portugal, and thank you so much for being here with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I don't mean to be doing weird things. For some reason, my laptop, if it's like in just the right position, I get a little bit better signal. So while you were talking, I'm trying to adjust it and see if I can get more than 3 bars. But thank you so much for having me. And I realized that the last time I did a Google Hangout, I actually had saved one of these things that you just told me how to do with the name bar, and it just says Cherie doesn't know what she's doing. And then right under my name now it says, what does this button do? And I'm going to leave it. I'm going to run with that.
It's good. It's good. It's great.
Okay, thank you so much indeed, Cherie. And since our viewers are just as likely as eager as I am to pick your brain, if that's all right with you, let's start with questions. And I basically fought Diana in Mortal Kombat to be able to ask the first one. And here it goes. How did you first encounter steampunk, and what is more appealing about it to you?
I think probably the first time I didn't know what it was at the time, but when I was a little kid, I was at Disney World. I'm from Florida, and so when I was a little kid, Disney World was just what you did. And it was the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea ride that I believe now is a Finding Nemo ride, which is a crying shame because the 20,000 Leagues one was just amazing. It was Captain Nemo's submarine with all the cogs and the brass and the leather furniture, and I remember like walking into it just being like, this. I want all of this. My dad's like, you want a submarine? I'm like, no, I went up, but I want this. And weirdly, I actually, from talking to other steampunk writers and steampunk people in general, I'm not the only one. Apparently, a lot of us sort of slid into it through Disney and Chitty Chitty Bang Bang and some of those movies from back in the day.
Basically, technology is awesome.
Yeah, well, I mean, and the early Disney stuff, in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, they were borrowing a lot of the science fiction from 60 years before, and so it stands to reason that they would kind of come at this angle. And so that's the first time I ever saw it and was like, I want that. And when I was a little older, when I was a teenager, I was a tragic goth as a teenager, like you do. And so I kind of slid into steampunk like via Tim Burton a little bit, kind of through 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea at Disney World, and then Tim Burton doing Sleepy Hollow, and like all of this. I don't do so much brown, but I like the black and the gray with the cogs and the gears, and so I kind of came into it that way.
Is actually, well, probably my reason as well. So I'm not
true. Yep.
Yeah. Well, a friend of mine and I were talking about it a while back because there's a lot of overlap between the goth community and the steampunk community. And in fact, every now and again, I'll do an event and I'll be like, all right, how many of you have a Vampire the Masquerade character sheet? Hands up, everybody. It's usually about half the room at least. But it's when you're a goth and you're young and you're theatrical and you're sad and so you make a show out of it. Well, now I'll be 40 next month, and I'm not sad anymore. My life's pretty good. I get to write monster stories for a living, and have a beautiful old house and husband and pets, and so I'm not dramatically sad anymore. But the desire to be theatrical doesn't really go away, and I think a lot of people kind of come to steampunk with that. Like it's got a little bit more of a historic underpinning. It's something a little more socially acceptable for a grown-up in an office. Like especially for men. My husband has complained at length about how it's so much easier for women to dress up than it is for men. Women have more costuming options in general, especially if you're coming at it as an old punk or an old goth. And in steampunk, these guys, and men's Victorian clothing kind of looks good on a lot of different body types. And and the vests and the beards are very hip right now anyway.
And the handlebars.
Yes, and the swoosh, which is fine. I mean, it's a great look. And like I said, I think it's kind of a way of parlaying that same theatrical impulse into something that's a little more acceptable if you're a grown-up who has to go to work every day or whatever. But so that's kind of the fun of it, I think, for some of us now.
Yes, it allows us to adult without feeling guilty about it. Be adulty.
Yes, it is very adulty, and it's sorry, that was my phone. We're dogs sitting right now in addition to my dog, and I think that was his mom. Give me 2 seconds, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
Yes, she's telling me when she's going to be returning. I have a big fluffy sweetheart of a dog, and she has a big fluffy sweetheart of a dog who's 9 years old with 3 legs and a heart condition. And so we stay in touch when she's out of town. I don't ordinarily answer my phone in these things. I just wanted to make sure she wasn't saying she was on her way over.
Don't worry.
Yeah. Yes, grown-up things.
No, we are all animal lovers, I think, so.
Oh, excellent. Yes, my little old cat almost makes me late. I just got back from the nursery, like a lawn and garden place, and I was bringing my stuff in, and I see this trail of poop across the floor, and she's like 17. 17 or 18. Yeah. We don't really know. We got her as an adult about 15 years ago. And so I clean that up, and I'm like, ooh, And then I come in here, and she hangs out in my bathroom. And there's poop all over the bathroom. And I pick her up, and it's all over her. And it's like 4 minutes to 2. I'm going, where's my husband? It's like, I need an adult here.
Exactly. Yeah, cats will be cats. On our previous conversation with Jim Butcher, we also ended up talking a lot about cats.
Yes.
Cats just find their way into these hangouts somehow. I don't know how.
I shut her out of this one. Usually she would be in my lap by now, but I want her clean and dry before she finds this lap again. Otherwise, she would have knocked over the laptop by now and been all over. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. It's been a day with animals. No, but okay, steampunk and goths. I remember what I was going to say. My train of thought derailed. When I was a teenager hanging out with my goth friends, it was usually like I was one of only a couple of girls, and it's all a bunch of pasty white boys hanging out in somebody's basement. But steampunk seems to be much better socially balanced. There's a lot more different kinds of people, men, women, everybody. A huge age spread, lots of different backgrounds, lots of different ways for everyone to kind of put their own spin on it. Excuse me, coat's coming back on me. The very first SteamCon out in Seattle some years ago, I was a guest at that, and the hotel filled up, and the fire marshal shut them down, said they couldn't sell any more tickets, they couldn't let anybody else in. So, and it was fine, it was cool, it was very successful, we were all very happy about it. And at some point, we see this old lady. I mean, this woman's probably in her 70s, maybe around 80 years old. And she's wandering around, just staring wide-eyed at everything. And she just happened to be in the hotel already. She had a room there, and she didn't know this conference was going on. And so she's asking people to explain, now, what's steampunk? Now, can you tell me about this? What is this? And so everyone tells her, and she just thinks that sounds amazing. And she's like, this looks like so much fun. You know who would love this? I'm going to go get my mother. And we're like, her mother? Her mother is 101 and is upstairs. And so this 101-year-old lady and her 80-year-old daughter come down, and we ran them through the dealer's room and just dressed them up and turned them loose and gave them badges. And we're like, it's a good time. But
that's amazing.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And I think I end up doing a lot of talks at schools about this kind of thing where kids have a hard time finding their way into history. Because it kind of, if you read history books, a lot of times it kind of feels like it's just one kind of person who ever did anything. Certainly in the States, it's a bunch of white dudes and they're all dead for 100 years and who cares, right? When I was a kid, I grew up in Texas I lived there for a while, and Texas is kind of its own thing. But Texas used to be its own country, and Texas is very excited about that. And Texas is going to make you learn all about that, all of you. So you have to take Texas history in school. So I was about 8 or 9 years old, and there's a book about Texas history, and it was a multi-grade classroom, so it belonged to one of the older kids. So I read this, and I think this is so cool. So I went to my teacher. His name was Mr. Hunt, and he was a mean old man who was not from Texas, to be clear. He was from New England, I think. And I was like, Mr. Hunt, this book was really cool. I just have one question. Why weren't there any ladies in Texas? And I'm like 9. I wasn't like, like raging, angry feminist or anything. I'm a little kid. There's a whole book about the history of Texas, and there's not a single woman in it. And he kind of, dear, there were ladies in Texas. They just weren't doing anything very important. And I was like, well, which made me into an angry little feminist. But, but there's kind of, there's whoever you are, whatever your gender, or your sexual orientation, your religion, your ethnicity, it doesn't matter. None of us are 21st century creations. We've all been here all along. And for some people, who never had much of a connection to history, this is sort of a way for them to find their way back in. One of my old friends is a 6.5-foot tall gay Southern black man. And he cosplays a steampunk character who is an itinerant teacher who teaches the children of the freed slaves how to read and write. And this is how he finds his way in, and this is how he participates in this. And I think it's not just important to talk about this and to take seriously the fact that all these different kinds of people were here, and they were all doing really interesting things. But I think it's also important that you can play with it, that it's a way people kind of not just assert their presence and assert their position in history and in society, but to be able to have a good time with it. And I think that's probably one of the most important and interesting things about it that has really stuck with me since I kind of was adopted into this community.
Yeah, I agree totally. We've seen that on our own conventions. There are young people, older people, all kinds of people that are brought together because of steampunk. It's really amazing. Jumping to the series, how much of the series, the Clockwork Century, did you have planned when you started Bone Shaker?
None of it. Bone Shaker, try to make the story short. It was the last book I was under contract for at the time, and the books before it had not sold well at all. And I was pretty sure that this was probably going to be the last book I got to write under my own name, because very often a writer will sort of reboot with a new pseudonym. It's better, the way publishing works, it's better to be a new writer with no track record than a writer who's sold some books but has a crappy track record. It has to do with the way bookstores order and maintain your stock. So I sold so poorly, I was pretty sure I was just going to have to do that. But originally I was under contract for a book called Awaken to Darkness, and it was a vampire noir. It was kind of a retelling of Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest, but with vampires in Seattle for funsies. And it was okay, you know, and I was about halfway through it and kind of already started kind of noodling with the idea that I needed to do something else. My career needed a new direction. I needed to do something different. This wasn't really working out for me. And we had moved to Seattle about 2 years before, back in 2006. And I lived there for a couple of years, and I felt like I knew the place well enough to maybe tell stories about it or try to. And their pioneer history from the 19th century was a hoot. It was just really strange. And so a rather surprising amount of it actually worked its way into Bone Shaker. Princess Angeline was a real person, for example. Several of the characters are based on real people. But let's see. So I started noodling with the idea of Bone Shaker, and I did a couple of chapters kind of on the side. And now my cat is yelling at the door to come in. Sorry, I was just gonna. Let's see if she's clean and dry. Yeah. All right, wanna come in, kid?
Cats. Maybe we'll have a cat to join us this time.
Yes? No? I'm not gonna hold the door
Cats
open already.
Be ready.
Yes.
Yes.
In. No.
Remember, guys, if you want, you can leave questions about cats.
Yes.
If you want.
Yeah. No, my bathroom has a heated tile floor.
All right.
And she has arthritis and likes to lie on the floor, so I don't want to keep her out. I just don't want her in my lap right now.
Cats.
Cats, yes.
She's welcome to join us if she wants.
Let's see how her butt's looking here. Yeah, it's better.
Has more cats. Speaking of Princess Angeline, who actually is one of my favorite characters, can I be so bold as to ask, you're really
Kitty.
You're really famous for writing these really strong, independent female characters, despite the historical setting, and let's not fool ourselves, Victorian age was not kind on women.
No, it was not.
This year shouldn't come as a surprise that women like them exist. Like you said, they were everywhere.
Yeah, once in a while people will complain saying that I'm making them too modern.
Yes, warrior princesses, right? They're everywhere.
Angeline was a real lady. If you read Clementine and the last one, Fiddlehead, Maria Boyd was a real person. And I actually toned down her adventures to make them more believable to the modern audience. I'm not even kidding. She was like, ooh boy howdy. And I kind of jammed her up with a woman who was a Pinkerton agent in the 19th century. He was a very, very famous Pinkerton agent who actually had all these crazy adventures and things. And when anytime anyone tells me, well, that feels a little modern, you know, obviously this is like a feminist interpretation of nope. Nope, this stuff really happened.
Did you have any special challenges writing them from a modern perspective? Like, since you weren't there and didn't probably went through what they want, did you actually had to stop and think sometimes, or have the issues coming up with writing them from your own modern perspective?
Well, I mean, yeah, you don't want to make them sound modern because they aren't modern. One of the more interesting challenges to me was like with Mercy and Dreadnought. The vast majority of well, probably people in the whole country, but especially in the American South in the 19th century, they weren't educated. They couldn't read and write, and it would be ridiculous for me to tell stories about ordinary people who were around here then. And for somebody like Mercy, the odds of her being literate were quite low. And many nurses, many professional people just couldn't read and write. And so I have her semi-literate. She can read and write maybe on the second or third grade level, which is but she's brilliant. You know, she's a very smart, capable, competent woman who has this ounce of authority, and that she is a medical professional, so people will listen to her when they're desperate enough. But so that was kind of the challenge for me. Somebody who's really, really smart, but I mean, like I have, you know, BA in English and history and a master's degree in rhetoric and critical theory, and so writing someone who has virtually no education, but not being condescending toward her, and yet still making her ring true, and I can't automatically have, well, and then she read a book about this, or she scans the newspaper. She can't do any of that. It would take her all damn day to sit and read a newspaper if she tried, you know, and she'd have to look up half the words. So that was interesting and difficult. But for Mercy specifically, though, my dad and my stepmom were both military nurses. And my dad's now a CRNA. He's an anesthesia guy. But he and my stepmom, like I got to talk to them about it a little bit. And I always said about my stepmom in particular, because she worked in the emergency room for years and years, like this woman, she's 5'2", maybe, little tiny red-haired woman, 100 pounds soaking wet when she was Mercy's age, would walk in. She could come home and find a bus full of pregnant women in labor crash through her living room in the middle of a cops and robbers shootout while aliens are beaming monsters down from overhead. And she would get out of her car and stand there and go, okay, first. And that would be sorted in like 60 seconds or less. She's just one of those people who she's an excellent organizer. And all right, we have assessed the situation. Now we're going to do this. And so I tried to give Mercy kind of that mentality of, all right, this is a mess. How do I make it not a mess? And now she's found the ball, so I guess she's feeling better.
Like Mercy, no, don't worry, really. Like Mercy, some of your characters are also unusual in the sense that we don't normally see them portrayed in fiction. Mm-hmm. What led you to choose tired to the bones working mother as a main character in Bone Shaker, for example? And the other characters, why? You know, I know they exist, but they don't normally exist in fiction. But it's great.
Well, yeah, you don't usually see them, and that's one reason I wanted to write about them. I mean, I have been accused of Mary suing a little bit with Briar and Bone Shaker just because she's about my age. And I found Seattle really difficult, especially the first couple of years. I'm from the Gulf Coast of the States, and it's semi-tropical and really warm and very sunny. And then I ended up in Seattle for 6 years, and the city was very, very kind to me, and I still have a lot of great friends there. But those first couple of years were really hard, and so I have this woman who's about my age, trapped in Seattle in the dark, and it's wet, and she's miserable, and she's surrounded by things, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that, really. But I don't know. Well, I was, to finish answering your other question, I'm sorry, I'm basically a bottle rocket of nonsense. You start me talking, and I just...
No, talk away.
Here comes the cat. No, you can't have that, kitty. All right, I may have a lap cat here in a second. Yes? Are we doing this?
Yeah, hello, cat. Hello,
cat. And don't show them your filthy butt. No. Okay, so my editor at the time, she's still my editor. Her name's Liz Gorinsky. She's the one who did those books. Saw me. Oh my God, you smell like poop. This is not happening. No, you got to get down. I'm sorry, but no. It smells terrible. You're gonna have a bath, is what this is. So Liz saw me talking about this other project I'd started working on, and she asked if she could see it, and I was like, you know, I don't know. Realistically, I knew that she probably wasn't going to be able to make me an offer on any more books anyway. And even if she wanted to, it's not always entirely up to the editors. And as poorly as I'd been selling, you know, I was trying to save her some grief. She's like, no, let me see it. So I gave her it was like 3 chapters maybe, and she got back to me. She's like, listen, I think that maybe what we should do is swap these out in the contract. And I think that the time is kind of right for something like this Bone Shaker project. Everybody and their brothers kind of done vampires, and they were kind of playing out by then. This was right before Twilight hit. And she's like, let's swap them out. Let's do that. And at the time, I was kind of like, well, I don't know, but I wasn't really feeling the vampire book, and I was like, okay. So, however, what this meant was my deadline didn't change, and I only had like 3 months to finish writing Bone Shaker, because I only had a handful of chapters on that one. So I buckled down and I did it, and the last part in particular went pretty quick. No! No! You stay down. You keep your smelly little self away. Ugh. Hang on, I gotta build a fort on my desk. There, stay out. This is what we've had to do over here. This is a little monster trying to find her way over to me. No. Stop it! What is this doing now? I have touched things.
Don't worry.
Sorry, there we go. I got it.
Damn it, cat!
Excuse me.
Don't worry.
Knock everything off my damn desk.
We'd like to leave this public service announcement. Cats happen.
Yes, cats happen. This tiny evil one. I don't know if you can see her or not. There she is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
This tiny evil thing that smells just like a toilet right now. As long as she stays over there, it'll be okay. No, so anyway, but that's why, like, at the very end, there's a chapter that's really short, and it basically amounts to, and then Zeke slept for a really long time, because we realized way far down the process, this was already in production, that we were missing a day from Zeke's timeline. And we had to fix that really quickly, like in an afternoon. So there was just the one, and I didn't really think anything. I never thought I was going to end up writing any more of them. And then all of a sudden it took off. And the number 1 piece of complaint disguised as feedback that I got about kind of this extended American extended American Civil War. People wanted to know what the rest of the country looked like, which is why I thought, well, when I did get to do another one, we'll start at this end of the country and work at the eastern end and work the way west, and then you get to see kind of what the rest of the nation looks like, and this alternate version of American history. So that was another individual one, though. They just signed me to do 1 sequel, and then they signed me to do the last 2. And then I did the 2 little ones with Subterranean. And those are a little bit shorter because I had a first refusal clause in my early contracts that anything over 50,000 words my publisher would get first pass on. And that's why Clementine is like 48,912 words. But that's why those are shorter. So there's a reason for that. But I mean, but speaking of that and different characters, I mean, Kragan Haney is like a 48-year-old black man who was a slave in the South who has a border ritual that he uses to run guns and drugs across the Rockies. That's really far outside of my experience, but I mean, those kind of badasses were around, and I would rather try and tell a story about someone who's different from me and maybe not get it 100% right than just pretend that those people weren't there and we're not doing this again. Nope.
It was one of my favorite things when I was reading Bone Shake. It's like this amazing building of setup and the world build and all of that. How much time did you spend researching and the challenges you get to connecting it to the steampunk world building and taking into account you also were not happy with doing just normal steampunk, you went the alternative history route as well?
Yeah, well, for a long time you realize that was not considered steampunk because it was American. I had a lot of people with the early reviews saying, well, I read this book and it was pretty cool, and it's a shame that it's not steampunk, though. I mean, this is practically steampunk, but I mean, obviously, it's not set in England, so it's not steampunk, and I'm like, there's no reason for that. You can do this anywhere. You can tell this anywhere. I'm really, really interested in local history. I find the local history is usually the weirdest stuff. It's the stuff that didn't make it into like the big history books, but the little history books. And ghost stories in particular. I have a private theory that ghost stories are kind of like a meme, in the sense that this is how a community remembers the really interesting people who maybe weren't famous, who didn't do anything, that landed them in the newspaper, but they were really interesting characters. And it's the way that communities kind of remember these people and keep talking about them by saying that they're still here, by telling them these ghost stories. So the more closely I can look at a place's local history, that's where I get all my best ideas, frankly. I borrow so much from real history because it's so much weirder than anything I could make up. But the Seattle Underground, I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, that's a real thing. It didn't happen the way I said it happened. In real life, what happened was that Seattle was originally kind of built on this floodplain right up against the ocean. And it was muddy and bad and bleh. And in 1889, it burned to the ground. A fire started in this, with a glue pot, and it just wiped it out. And at the time, actually nobody died. So, there's that. But at the time, they decided, well, we actually have an opportunity to rebuild this city better. We can raise this up off the tidal flat. We can regrade and then put everything up so that it's not going to be, like, threatened by high tide. We could have toilets. Their toilets, when they tried to plug them into there was no sewer system originally, so they had to build one. It was made out of wooden pipes, and you could only flush at low tide, because if you tried to flush at high tide, the high tide would back up and your toilets would explode. I'm serious. This is a thing that happened. So
I didn't know this.
It's insane. So in the newspapers, they would print the tide schedules so you would know when you couldn't flush your toilets. And this is how this was. So in 1889, the city burns down. And they go ahead and rebuild. And so the people who owned the businesses wanted to hurry up and rebuild them because they couldn't afford to wait for the city to restructure. But the city said, well, fine, you do that, but we own the streets. So they started regrading the streets. So imagine they've built these streets up like 30 feet off the ground, and if you want to cross the street, you have to go climb a ladder, cross the street, and get down over here again. And eventually they filled in all of that. And so you had, I forget how many dozens of blocks are just completely hollow under the city of Seattle. And for a long time, people treated it like almost like an indoor mall. Because the first floors of these old businesses became, the underground entrance where you could just kind of hang out of the rain. It rains a lot there. Stay dry, do shopping, whatever. But it quickly turned into a place that was unsavory. A lot of drugs, a lot of prostitution, a lot of terrible, illicit, nasty, bad things. And eventually, I forget when, there was a problem with like basically plague rats and all kinds of stuff, and so the government shut it down and closed off, said you're not allowed to come down here anymore, which didn't stop anybody necessarily, but you could no longer operate businesses out of there or do anything like that. In the 1960s, this guy came along because they were going to tear down a bunch of these old buildings downtown, and they call it Pioneer Square in Seattle. And he was like, we don't have that much history here anyway. Everything is after 1889. We should save these old buildings. So this is our heritage. And so he put an ad in the paper and said, meet me, at this address in Pioneer Square, and I will take you into the underground, and I'll show you what's there. And he thought maybe a couple people were going to show up. Something like 500 people came out. So he passed around a hat. And his name was Bill Spidell. And they still do the underground tour today. They run half a dozen shows a day, and they take you underneath the city, and it's really, really cool. It's really, really interesting. And I couldn't make it up if I tried. So that was a real thing. And I had taken the tour a bunch of times, because every time you take it, typically you get a different guide. So you get like whatever that guide thinks is the most interesting and important, and then you take it from a handful of people and kind of fill in all the little details. And the last time I took it, they offered me a job. And they're like, no. I'm too busy for that, but thank you. But like I said, the local history is the weird stuff. It's the stuff that people still tell stories about and still pass around. And the author Cherie Priest.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's fantastic. He did a book called The Truth, which is about basically this printing press that's sitting underground and this newspaper is being produced. He wrote that after taking the underground tour and seeing an old printing press that somebody had actually dumped in under the city as part of landfill. I thought it was fascinating, so he wrote about that. But a lot of that stuff was just real. Like Princess Angeline was real. In case anybody has, I'm going to guess that most of the people have probably at least are a little familiar with Bone Shaker. I know you guys are. In real life, what happened was, oh, there you go. It's my copy. In real life, Princess Angeline was Chief Seattle's daughter, and her daughter married a white guy. And it was not a good match, as they used to say, about really terrible and abusive marriages back in the day. he was absolutely horrible to her. They had a little boy, and everybody knew, and nobody was going to do anything about it. And one day, Angeline had been taking care of her grandson, and she took him home and walked in and found her daughter hung in the kitchen. And either she killed herself or he killed her. Either way, the guy was responsible. And everybody knew. And she tried and tried and tried to get justice for her daughter, and it just never happened. She did end up with custody of her grandson. She took care of him. And but nothing ever came of him. Nobody cared. Nobody was going to go and arrest a white guy for something they couldn't prove he did to a Native woman. It wasn't. Even though, I mean, Princess Angeline was very well respected in the community. She stuck around even after most of them left, and she lived into the 20th century. And there are photos of her from Life magazine. She used to hang around the Pike Place Market and sit on a blanket and sell things. She lived to be quite old, and she was apparently quite a character. Yeah. And I thought it would be fun to, you know, give her a little closure.
Yeah. Oh, if she's anything like in the book, she's awesome.
I could find out very little about her, like her personality, just kind of what you get little bits and pieces. But she sounded like somebody who didn't take any crap and who was a force to be reckoned with, and it just fascinated me. I've been to her grave. I used to live down the street from the big cemetery where most of the early city people are buried, as well as Bruce and Brandon Lee. They're also buried there. But I found her grave. I went and looked her up and everything. So.
Going back a little bit to Seattle, I'd love to see that in a movie. And I know there was some talk about a Bone Shaker movie some years ago.
Is that still a thing? No, it didn't pan out. It kept running into difficulties at every turn, and eventually the option lapsed. But we have had some other interest in it from other parties, and so you may end up seeing it.
Series, maybe? Comic books?
No. It just... People are talking, and maybe something will come of it, and maybe nothing will, you know.
Would you like a spin-off series also? Would you like to make, if you could, would you make a spin-off series also set in the Clockwork Century, but in some other direction, maybe in another in another country?
Sure, go for it. I don't care. I think it's great. I'm always happy when you do
it. Would you do it?
Would I do it?
Yes.
Gosh, I don't know. My plate has filled up with other things for the next at least year or two here, so I would probably leave that to someone else. We had a really great script for the movie, though. It was written by this guy named John Hilary Shepard, who does Nurse Jackie for Showtime, that TV show. It's won a bunch of awards and stuff. But no, it fell through. And maybe we'll get lucky one of these days, and something else will come of it. We'll see. But there's Kolchak the Night Stalker, the TV show from back in the day, was set partially in the Seattle Underground. In fact, you can go down there and see some of the places where they filmed things.
Oh, okay.
But if you want to see it.
Yeah.
But or just Google around. There's a website dedicated to the Vitals Underground tour, and you can kind of get a general idea.
Okay. We sort of ran out of questions by now. Fortunately, our trusty watchers are now supplying with their own, and...
Okay. I'll try to answer shortly and be quick. And I'm bad at that. I'll try.
Feel free. I just would hate to use it too quickly. Anyway, first question. This is from Rafaela. Would you say that this diversity you see in real life steampunk communities ends up playing a part in your books?
Well, sure. I mean, well, I'll come at it from this angle in particular. I'm from the American South, and here. The population looks very different from the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I know a lot of black people. A lot of black people live here. Not so many Asian people, but we have a lot of Latino people as well. But in Seattle, there are very few black people or Latinos, but there are a lot of Asian people. And I want to reflect the way the world actually looks, because it's very weird to me when you tell stories about the past or the future, and it's just all white people. Toby Buckell, who does a wonderful series of books, Ragamuffin, and he does some steampunk as well. He does the Caribbean steampunk. I'm pretty sure it was him, had this wonderful quote about how anytime he watches something set 1,000 years in the future and it's all white people, he wonders why nobody ever talks about the race war that wiped out everybody else, because how strange it is, So, like in Seattle, it would be very strange to tell a story that didn't have any Asian people in it. There's a lot of Asian people there. Just like if you're telling a story about the American South, it'd be really weird if you wrote a book that didn't have any black people in it. So I'm just trying to show what I see. I'm trying to make it look, I mean, obviously it's fantasy, it's science fiction, it's whatever. But if you're still telling stories about people, well, they should look like the people who are actually here. And I always try to include, at least a couple of characters who are really outside of my own experience, but people who I know and people who I've seen, like I get email about Ganymede and about a character in Ganymede who has a secret, and ooh boy howdy, the emails I get from people didn't do things like that back then. They did not.
Exactly.
They did not.
No.
And well, no. All right. She's based on a real person. And actually, somebody from Seattle, I relocated her. But they'll take you down in the underground sewer, and there's a portrait. There was a woman named Madame Damnable, and she was called Madame Damnable. And there's a photo of her right around the turn of the century in her salon with several of her ladies. And like your tour guide will at one point ask me, like, now here's a trick question: how many women are in this picture? Because one of them was born with an apparent biological gender of male. Now, was he a cross-dresser, or was she transgendered in a time where you couldn't transition like you can now? God knows, we'll never know. But there was clearly a call for her services. This had to have been an open secret, and so that's fascinating to me. But I love I like getting those emails. I like making those people angry, or at least making them think. And I go, no, this was a real person, and shut up, you're wrong. We didn't invent any of this. This has always been going on, and so that's
we existed actually. They existed.
Yeah, they exist. Yeah, amazingly enough.
Yep.
And I try and have my heroes and villains like a pretty good mix of lots of different kinds of people. I don't want to make this kind is, and I hope that like Yazoo, who's kind of the Chinese. He ends up kind of being in charge of the underground Seattle. Like he's a bad guy kind of in Bone Shaker, but as the books progress, you figure out that he's got his own agenda, but he's actually trying to do what's best for his community, and I hope that he comes off rounded too. Because I got a little bit of complaint about that. They call it the yellow peril when they're being oh well, now you're just making Asian people look like the bad guys and they're all ninjas or whatever. No. But it would be weird not to have Asian people in Seattle, and it's like they said, I would rather try it and kind of screw it up a little than just pretend that it doesn't exist. Because then, you try, you fail, try again, fail better next time, and hopefully do a better job of representing people in the future. So anyway, yes. So that's why my books are diverse, because the world is diverse. It's not really very complicated.
Exactly. Yeah. This is a question from Marcus. How many steampunk elements, like dress and gadgets and costumes, bleed into your everyday life?
Well,
I like my goggles.
I like your goggles. They're fabulous. They're cut off in the picture of you that I have in this frame. But yes, I could tell that you were wearing them. I have a number of goggles myself. I got to where I had to be careful with people were bringing me presents of pocket watches and things, and when you don't check your luggage, that will get you searched at the airport when people see clumps of metal things with cogs in them. So I have to be careful with that now. But I used to do it a lot more, partly because in Seattle it's a lot cooler. Now I'm back in the American South and it's quite warm here, so you can't layer up quite the same. It was hard to be a goth here too, I'll be honest. Being a goth in Florida was tricky. You can't, you step outside and you get a tan,
Yeah, I get you. It's the same here in my city. It's much warmer than everywhere else.
Yeah, so it's you can't wear the trench coat and the big fluffy, but I still do a lot of the big fluffy cotton skirts because those are great for here. And I have a Victorian house and we have a number of antiques. Nothing valuable, it's just stuff that we thought was cool. I have this wonderful English buffet that's oak. And it was built around 1916, and it has all the brass hardware. It's very deco, right at that Nouveau and Deco transition, and it was rotted out on the inside, so I cleaned it out, rebuilt it, and turned it into a bar. So we have that in our parlor. So the great thing about steampunk is if it has any core philosophy, it's reduce, reuse, and recycle. Because no two steampunks show up at an event wearing the same thing ever. That just doesn't happen. Because you make your own clothes, or you buy from people who make their own clothes and their own jewelry, and that's great. That's fantastic. That's the best of all possible. I mean, if there's a message to take forward, then that's certainly it. So I try and do that too, is what I'm saying. I try and repurpose old things. I like to repurpose old things. I'm repurposing this house that we've dumped a small fortune into in 3 years, trying to preserve it and bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I do all those things, and that was not a very short answer, and I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize, really. Claudia, are you there? You seem
Yes, I am here. I am so sorry. I was attacked by the internet cat that destroyed my computer.
Excellent, excellent.
I come
Internet cats unite.
Yes, to ask Cameron House's question. He would like to know, what lessons have you learned from writing your books? Is there something you wish you knew sooner?
Patience. It really is the thing that springs to mind. I mean, these things, they take not just a long time to write, but they take a long time to produce and to come out. And I was talking to a friend of mine who's interested in changing his diet and starting to lose some weight and whatnot. And he's like, I just want to have it all come off like right now. And I was like, well, I want to write a book like right now, but you do a little bit every day. You don't have to do everything all in one go. And if you can sit down and just make yourself change this one habit every day, just do this one thing every day. If you write 1,000 words a day, which is frankly not very much, I can do it in an hour, usually. If you can do 1,000 words a day, that's 365,000 words at the end of the year. It piles up, and eventually you have something to show for it. But patience does not come naturally to me, nor does discipline. And it took me several years of working from home and really training myself. I'm going to sit down and I'm going to do this every single day. And I've had like 3 books a year come out for the last few years. And once I had 1 year I had 3 books come out, and I was working for EA out in California on a video game, and I was doing a convention like once a month that was out of state, and it's like, how do you fit all that in? Just a little bit every day. But you have to do it every day, because if you don't, then you end up against a deadline and you need to write 30,000 words in a week, and that's horrible, and you don't want to do it. And maybe you can't. I can't. But it's but just patience and discipline. That's really it. And there's no great secret to publishing. Everybody seems to think that there's like a secret password to get you in. Just time, persistence, and that's time, persistence, and patience. That's really all there is to it.
That's something I need to learn: time, persistence, and patience. Because I'm a writer too. Well, not published, but
You'll get there. Time, persistence, and patience. That's there's no substitute for it. And cats.
Cats, yes, cats too. Cats are important for writers.
Okay, give us another question then, Diana.
Yes.
On average, this is a question from Ben. On average, how do you divide your time when writing a book? How much is spent on research and how much is spent on writing, since you write a lot of alternative history and like Maplecraft, for example, it's alternative history, but it's also fiction. How do you divide it?
Real people, but not really what happens either.
Yes.
I tend to do most of the research up front. Like I have a record. Oh, hey. I love that. That's one of my favorite things I've done in a long time. I'm so proud of that book. I love that book. I was so glad I finally got to write it. I'd had it on the back burner for about 6 or 7 years. I actually started it before Bone Shaker was published.
Oh.
And it just took me forever to finally get the time to sit down and write it. No, I have a reference library. I love reference books. I love nonfiction and history. And I usually will come across something that kind of piques my attention and then go digging for it and see how much I can turn up, and then set it down and just kind of let the rest sort of grow from that. But keep it around, like sometimes like, oh, I can't remember how old was this one character when this happened, or like in general, when I can, I stick to real life, and when it's not convenient for me to do so, then I don't. But maybe just make something up, who cares, right? But I find it interesting and satisfying to stay as true as I can. But usually when I'm working on a book, like right now I'm supposed to be working on a book, but I have plenty of time, and I have this other book coming out, and I've already had one come out this year, and I'm still in production for Chapelwood, the follow-up for Maplecroft. Sometimes you don't get to sit down and do it every day, so you got to pace yourself and do it when you can. But if I am actively working on something toward an end goal, usually I get up in the morning and I walk the dog, and I spend a couple hours doing writer business, answering emails, printing off contracts, going to the post office. All that little stuff can actually eat an entire day fairly easily. And I don't have an assistant. I have to do everything myself. So phone calls and emails and interviews. Often people will email me questions, and then I fill them out and send them back. And those can take a couple hours depending, because I like to try and be really thoughtful, and I try and not say the same thing to everybody, you know. So break for lunch, and then the afternoon I actually sit down and try and write. And then I usually quit around supper time. And some people have like more endurance for it. Like I know writers who will sit down 10, 12 hours a day and just flow. I don't. I camp out about 4 hours or about 4,000 words. That's a real good day for me. Usually it's more like 1,000 or 2,000, and so I envy those people. That's fantastic. It's just I don't have the stamina for it. It can be really draining. You know, I have had a couple of days. I think my biggest fiction day ever was about 8,000 words, and at the end of it, I just wanted to go sleep for a week. It's just exhausting. So pacing yourself. So that's basically how my day breaks down.
This is a question from Pete. Which of the Clockwork Century books is your personal favorite? From all of them, including Clementine and Jacaranda?
No, probably I would say Dreadnought was probably my favorite. Either that or Bone Shaker. I mean, like you love them each in a different way. but Dreadnought was a little closer to home. In my own family, you know, a few generations back, there were a bunch of illiterate hill people in the southeast, and so trying to kind of that was just closer to home for me. That's all. So and I like getting to show the whole country. And here she comes again.
Heart attack?
Yeah. No, you can't have that. No, you can't have those. I cannot have my earrings. Took them out so I could wear. Yeah. Train of thought derailed again. I'm sorry.
That's quite all right.
Yes.
We'll start with another question, again from Ben Macy.
Okay.
He wants to know, as you're fond of picking up on the more eclectic elements of the 19th century in your books, are you thinking of writing books that aren't set in the more stereotypical countries of the period, like Prussia, Britain, USA, CSA, and less featured ones?
I try. I'm not saying I want to I don't want to write outside of my comfort zone, but I kind of believe in. There's a phrase, the genius of place. I try to at least visit all of the places I write about and spend some time in them. I find it difficult to write about places if I've never been there before, no matter how much research you do. My God, you're coming around again. I find that even if I do just a lot of research, it doesn't quite ring as true as if it's someplace that I'm personally real familiar with. No poop-smelling cat in the lap, I'm sorry. Generally speaking, like for me, I try and keep it around here, and every now and again, people will ask about well, how did you decide what bits of history to change for to make the Civil War last longer? Dude, I'm from the South. Alternate history or alternate versions of the Civil War are kind of like a national pastime. Everybody talks about this stuff. I've heard, well, if this had happened, or if this had happened, or if this had happened. No, you cannot. I'm sorry. It is. So I just kind of took a bunch of little things, because I didn't need for the CSA to win. I just needed for them to hang on for an extra. Honestly, it's not a very popular opinion in the South, but it is my opinion that they lost the war when they declared it. Damn it.
She wants to join us.
She does, but she smells terrible.
Question. I think she just wants another question to be asked.
All right, another question. We started a little late. We can run a little past 3. It'll be fine.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Timothy asks, out of the Disney movies, what one is your favorite steampunk-themed movie? Disney or otherwise? Steampunk movies, because there aren't a lot of steampunk movies, right?
There aren't, and they tend not to be very good. But let's be honest. I mean, You know, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. The comics are great. The movie was just kind of awful. And seriously,
a Disney movie that it's good and it's steampunk, it's Atlantis. Because it was drawn by Mike Mignola, for example, the concept artist.
Yes, and he's fantastic, by the way. He's a very nice man. He gave me a really great blurb for Bone Shaker via Facebook. And I got this Facebook message from M. Mignola, and I'm like, bullshit, Mike Mignola's sending me a Facebook message to tell me he liked my book. I don't believe that for a minute. Yep, it was him. He's very nice. I've got to buy him drinks since. But, you know, honestly, I think probably the Johnny Depp Sleepy Hollow with Tim Burton was probably one of my favorite steampunk movies because it is real gothy. It kind of has it hits that right note where it's clearly like, and steampunk isn't a binary. It's not a this is or this is not. I feel like it's more of like a scale, say 1 to 10. Like at 1, I would say the new Sherlock Holmes movies with Robert Downey Jr. They're not really steampunk, but you can tell that there's some steampunk influence there a little bit. You know? And at 10, yeah, like you can see it from there. At 10, I would put like the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen comics, and like maybe around 5, I'd say Mignola's Hellboy. It's very steampunk influenced, but it kind of not in a way that you think of traditionally. And please don't make me do this again, my cat. I love you. She's trying to climb. She's hopping down off my desk into my lap, and it's no. So I mean, but there's a broad spread of it, and you can come at it from a lot of different angles. So it's not an either or, and yes or no. But I really liked that Sleepy Hollow. I thought it was great, and you know, the old 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie. Come on, that was too much fun. And that was my first contact with it, so I've got a soft spot in my heart for that one.
All right, this one is from Rui. How much research goes into your steampunk technology? Because honestly, as a guy, this is him saying, who doesn't know a thing about technology, I found every bit of it fully plausible. Oh,
right, thank you. Well, some of it depends. Like, the guns are something that I don't know much about, like the Spencer repeating rifle that Breyer carries. I did a lot of research on that because I don't want to screw it up because that's a real thing. When it came to the dirigibles and stuff, there's this really, this really dry, boring book. It's an academic treatise called War of the Aeronauts. And it's about this guy, my favorite Victorian name ever, Thaddeus Sobieski Constantine Lowe. He was a Union aeronautics engineer during the American Civil War who patented a method of creating hydrogen gas on the battlefield with a mobile set of carts and tanks and this, that, and the other. So I read through the whole thing and I took a bunch of notes and I kind of do some hand waving, ta-da, hydrogen. Because, I mean, they had hydrogen balloons back in the 1860s. And the truth is, nothing drives technology quite like war. And if this war had gone on and gone on and gone on, well, in 1862, 63, they had hydrogen balloons. We'll give them another 7 or 8 years. They might actually have, something that's capable of holding people and transporting people. And give them another 10 years, 15 years, what would they have? What would they do? So some of it I do a lot of research on. Some of it I just pull completely out of my butt. Like the doozy dazer, I just made that. I don't know. Have an idea. It kind of looks a little bit like a bazooka, maybe.
Was there any special inspiration for the Bone Shaker itself? Or is it just more, I need a machine like this because plot demands it?
Yeah, well, that and people keep sending me email or links to stories. In Seattle, in real life, there's a giant drilling engine called Big Bertha. There was this road called the Alaskan Way Viaduct that went up in the 1950s. And it's this double-layer highway that runs kind of along the ocean up there, the Sound. And it was falling apart, and everybody knew the next earthquake was going to take it down one way or another. So they finally took it down, and they voted to put in a tunnel underneath the city instead. So they've been working on it for years and years and years. And people send me links to it all the time, like, oh no, they didn't listen to Cherie Priest for Bone Shaker. Oh, bad things are going to happen. I'm like, it was fiction. But then the stupid thing got stuck on something, and they didn't know what was underground, and they had to back it up. And then Big Bertha hit a pocket of gas because it was like, woo! Anytime anything happens with Big Bertha, somebody sends. I get 50 people sending me links to the stories about it online. It's insane.
Cherie knew, Cherie knew.
Yes. I'm like, no.
Wait, we are running out of time, so we're going to choose one last question. I'll make it a good one.
All right.
You talked earlier about the emails you receive criticizing you for featuring strong female characters in your books. We all know this is a sadly endemic problem that seems to be growing. What's your personal way of combating this?
Well, it depends. I mean, I just keep writing the characters anyway, for one. And when I get those emails, you know, you've obviously touched a nerve with someone, and I would much rather make, you know, I would much rather people feel strongly about the material than just kind of be like, eh. You know, like a really strong bad review, honestly, I find more satisfying than the reviews where people are like, eh, whatever. Obviously, I would prefer for people to love the material because I work very hard on it. But like in my personal life, my powers of ignore are so mighty. I have been a woman on the internet for nearly 20 years. You'd be amazed what I can ignore, and what I just not everybody can, and some stuff you can't ignore. In fact, when I was in Seattle, we had a couple of instances where we had to get the cops involved because I had a problem fan or two who went through my medical records and tried to find out where I live and show up at my doorstep and call me and yell at me. And husband tried to force me into a car in a dark parking lot in the middle of the night. And like you're going to get bad, weird stuff sometimes, and you should pay attention to that. And it annoys me when people are like, oh, just ignore it. I can ignore a lot, and a lot of it is just kind of the background radiation of your life. But generally speaking, you know, the vast majority of people have been really cool about it and really great about it. And kids. I have young readers for the first time in my life. A lot of teenage boys love Princess Angeline. Who knew? Seriously, that's why when I did Inexplicables, I had the teenage boys with Princess Angeline because all my boy readers, they all want to ask about Princess Angeline. So apparently a Native American cross-dressing princess who throws knives, that's what teenage boys want. Okay.
There's hope for the future.
Yes, it's hope for the future, and I love that, and so I love it when people go, yes, this is what I wanted to see, thank you. So that when I do get the emails from people going, well, people aren't really like that back then, or when people write reviews complaining about my characters being too modern or whatever, well, you know, and maybe they'll think about it, maybe next time they'll surf across some link on the internet about like the real Maria Boyd. In real life, and I toned this down, she was a Confederate spy. We're not entirely sure how old she was, it's a little fuzzy. She came from a rich family, Virginia, and what happened is the Yankees came through, and one of them indecently assaulted her mother, so she shot him to death. She was probably about 15 years old when this happened.
Wow.
So the officers were like, well, one, he had it coming, but two, what are we going to do with a teenage girl? We don't have jails for teenage girls. She's not like a prisoner of war or anything. So they went, don't do that again. And what she took away, seriously, and so like what she took away from it was, they can't touch me. And
wow.
So, yes. And she was not a beautiful girl. She was frankly rather homely. And in fact, when eventually she became famous and pictures of her were posted in northern newspapers, people were very unkind about her appearance. She was not a beautiful girl. But she had a body for miles, and like nobody ever noticed that she wasn't beautiful because apparently she was just, everything below the neck was a 10. So by the time the war was over, she had been married, widowed, engaged, left at the altar, in and out of prisoner of war camps, had killed I don't know how many people, had been to and from Europe a few times, and eventually, when she came back to the Confederacy, she had to stop spying because she was too famous to spy. Everybody knew who she was. And when the war ended, she was about 19. This all happened before she was even like old enough to drink. And so like I left out everything except, and she was married to a Union naval officer, or a Union Navy boy. And he died on a ship coming somewhere, so she was widowed. So I left that marriage in, but I left out the other. I left out a bunch of stuff because I thought nobody's going to believe this. I already get emails from people complaining that my lady characters are just a little too modern. Well, if I throw all this in there,
they should be in the kitchen.
Yeah,
of course.
I'm starting to get flashbacks.
Yeah. No, so I just try and keep telling those stories, and I try and well, I hope that I also treat my male characters with respect. I want everybody I want them all to be rounded and interesting people, and I just don't treat the female characters any different. So, and as a woman, I tend to write from a female point of view. I mean, I don't always, but I tend to. So I'll just keep on writing my tough ladies, and as long as people will publish them, and then when they won't publish them anymore, maybe I will. I don't know.
And we'll keep enjoying them. Sounds good.
Thank you very much.
Unfortunately, it seems our time is now coming to an end, so we're going to finish this hangout.
I have to return the dog to his people.
We'd like very much to thank Cherie Priest for giving us her time, as well to all of our viewers, whether from Portugal or the other parts of the world. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you again on the next step on the road to EuroSteamCon Portugal. Goodbye and have a nice evening.
E o nosso tempo acabou, infelizmente temos que ficar por aqui. Queremos agradecer desde já à Cherie Priest e a todos aqueles que vieram assistir, quer de Portugal ou de outras partes do mundo. Obrigada a todos, esperamos ver-vos no próximo passo do Road to EuroSteamCon Portugal. Adeus e boa noite.
Yeah.